Good morning, everyone, and a big thanks for joining this webinar, Contracting for Success. So we'd just like to spend a couple of minutes just introducing ourselves first before we get into the meat of the discussion. So I'm Rob Douglas, and I'm responsible for new business for Barker's, bringing 25 years plus of experience on the other side of the fence, so to speak. So I've worked supplier side. Across lots of engagements, which involve fairly substantial investment in technology to drive business transformation, all those sorts of good things. So, I've been working through procurement and contract negotiation processes for many years. So I bring that supplier perspective. Um, I'd also like to very briefly introduce you to Barker's for those who don't know who Barker's are. So Barker's are a technology procurement and contract governance consultancy. So we provide, over 10 years now, we provide advice and experience into our customers who are and their technology procurement contract governance initiatives. And the focus of that work is to drive out costs, drive out best practice, and increase value for money across our customers' source to contract programs. So that's very briefly what Barker's do. In terms of Q&A, there is a Q&A button on the webinar page, so please raise your questions through the Q&A button. And then on that note, I'd like to pass you across to Mark, who will introduce himself as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rob, and it's great to see so many of you on the call. My name is Mark Elkington, and I'm responsible for the technology procurement line of business here at Barker's. I've been in procurement for about 35 years. The last 20 of those years, I've focused on technology procurement. So in today's webinar, we're going to be talking about the best way that you can contract for success, and by that we mean contracting in a way that will improve the ongoing operation of your contracts with service providers. And Rob and I have picked 5 key aspects. We could have picked more, but we'd be here all day. So we picked 5 key aspects that we think are critical to the ongoing performance of the IT service provider contracts. But it's kind of the problems that you get with running IT service provider contracts are pretty well known, I would think, to everybody who's on this call. So things like the performance isn't up to scratch, or the contracts are stuck with what you described at the beginning of the process, and 5 years later they're completely out of date, or any changes that you make, you're overcharged for those changes. Rob, how does this all feel from a service provider perspective?
Yeah, it's a great intro, Mark. And those 3 areas are common challenges from my experience, but they're common challenges from both sides of the fence. They're not just they don't just sit with the supplier; they sit with the customer as well. So I'll cover a few of those off in terms of what that means. So from the customer side, I've seen instances where just simply the customer's not ready in terms of engage the supplier, so the supplier can deliver their services. It sounds quite maybe a little bit unusual, but I've seen that a number of times. The customer's just not ready to engage the supplier. And then there's the commitment and the availability of key resources from the customer side. So, the supplier does need, or the service provider does need to have access to those key resources, and also the information that they need so they can deliver their services effectively. And then the third one on the customer side is dealing with existing partners. So I've been through a number of procurement exercises where you don't really get to understand what the partner organizations do and how they're going to interact with what you're doing. So that's another key cause of some of these issues that you're talking about. On the service provider side, there's some challenges there as well. So the big one I've come across is the way, and I was on the sales side, so the way services and solutions are sold don't always map on to how they're actually delivered to the customer organization. Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a big gap between this is how it's been sold, this is the expectation and the experience the customer wants, but the way the service providers teams actually deliver those services is quite different. So that causes issues. And then you do get circumstances. It's very competitive marketplace, so people price to win.
Yeah.
Right, but they price to win. They don't give stuff away for free. So there's a number of things go on in there. They can dilute the experience of their resources, and so on and so on and so on. So all these things contribute towards those points. And the last one, I suppose, is, and we'll get into this later in the conversation, is about requirements. Interpretation, understanding of requirements. If the customer's requirements aren't nailed down and everyone's certain in terms of what they are, then a service provider can hide behind, I suppose, their interpretation of what those requirements are. And all these things sort of gear towards those challenges that we've spoke about already.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. And I think there's some clues there from Rob about the kind of things we'll be discussing. So the 5 key aspects that Rob and I have picked are: number 1, detailed governance processes; number 2, clear requirements, deliverables, assumptions, and dependencies; number 3, unitized pricing; number 4, fewer SLAs; and number 5, service credits that are there to encourage rather than punish. So let's dive in and look at the first one of those, which are governance processes. So the key things about governance processes and drafting them into contracts in a way that enables those contracts to run effectively once they go live are making sure that all the meetings that are required are clear about when those meetings are going to be, how frequent they're going to be, where they're going to be, who attends, who organises those meetings. Should be clear terms of reference for each of those meetings. So why is the meeting being run? What's the agenda for the meeting? What are the inputs and outputs for those meetings, and the deadlines for those inputs and outputs, and who's responsible for doing each of them? There need to be clear escalation paths in the contract. So what's the hierarchy of the meetings, and what's the hierarchy of the individuals for escalating issues through the meetings and the individuals? Now that's likely to be in a lot more detail than you'll see in a dispute clause in your general T's and C's. There need to be clear change control processes, and those change control processes need to have commercial reviews built in, so that any of the commercials that are associated with those changes can clearly be reviewed and challenged. And there need to be commercial governance rights built into the contract as part of the governance processes that allow you to review any of the proposals or any of the operation of the contract to make sure that they're in line with what was agreed originally commercially. Rob?
A really good set of points, Mark. So even though I was a sales guy, the governance piece for me is really important. Right? It's basically, it sets the tone of the engagement between the service provider and the customer. So for me, governance is about providing both organizations the confidence what we're doing is the right things to do at the right time, with the right teams. It prevents ambiguity, which again point to some of the challenges we've already talked about. It provides a clear set of responsibilities for both parties, so everyone's really clear in terms of who's doing what, when they're doing it, why they're doing it. And if you do all those things, that removes risk in my mind. And it creates the strong and open relationship, which is key to delivering the contracted service successfully. And on top of that is something which was very important to me, which was delivering a high quality experience to the customer. But governance is a thing I think service providers should really concentrate on, because it's it's an opportunity to increase their standing with the
Mm,
customer in terms of you know de delivering what the customer wants, the experience that they want, and do it in a way
mm,
that the customer wants it to be done as well.
mm,
So that's all about, if you can do that, and for the service provider, that increases their, as I say, their
mm,
standing with the customer, but increases their
mm,
credibility and opens up new opportunities either with the customer or
mm,
in the external market. It's something I've seen uh, over the last 5 or 10 years, is a lot of people, a lot of the organizations I sold into had organizational charters. So you'd look at the customer charter, and governance is key. How they operate, how they deliver their services is absolutely
mm,
key to them. So again, you can this is the important role that governance is
mm,
playing in the customer organizations.
mm. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
So if we move on to number 2 on our list, which are requirements and deliverables, assumptions and dependencies. So my view is that the majority of the drafting and negotiating time should be spent on making sure that the requirements and the deliverables and the assumption dependencies are really clearly drafted, and clearly describe what it is that's required or is going to be delivered. Really should be aiming for no TBCs um, in those different descriptions and lists. Um, One of the things that I found can work is where you're not 100% clear on something like a limit perhaps, or a particular number. Say you've got 5,000 units, you can use some bands around that. Say it's 5,000 plus or minus 10%. Um, the other thing that I'd say with this is that with dependencies, where the supplier has a dependency on you as the customer, um, I would make sure that those are not in any way open-ended. They need to be absolutely 100% clear what the requirement is on you, what the dependency is. Um, Otherwise, that will be used at some point as a get out of jail free card, even if what's happened is only really tenuously connected to the dependency. Um, so they have to be locked down. The other thing I'd say is, when you're looking at assumptions, um, try and resolve assumptions where they can actually be resolved. So rather than sort of sitting in isolation in the negotiating room and saying, well, look, we don't quite know the answer to that, um, try and actually get a resolution to the assumption. Um, and in some cases, what I also see is there's a confusion between agreements and assumptions. So, for example, if you're saying there's an assumption that we're going to be working with 5,000 units and the pricing is determined on that, really that needs to be hived off into something where it's the pricing base rather than an assumption, because then this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to deal with it. Um, so I think from my point of view, those are the key bits that I always focus on when I'm negotiating a contract, when I'm looking at those requirements, deliverables, assumptions, and dependencies. Rob, what do you find?
I think each one of those, Mark, is a discussion in its own right, isn't it?
Mm,
Requirements and
mm,
but they're all linked. All this stuff all links together for me. So if requirements aren't great, aren't properly articulated, um, you're just going to get you know and poorly defined deliverables. Sorry, those two things. That's just going to lead to the service provider, detailing a huge amount of assumptions and dependencies, which is basically they see as a risk. All right. So
mm,
if your requirements aren't great, your dependencies aren't great, the supplier will just price risk into the contract, which isn't good for anybody really. So it's an opportunity. Again, experience tells me this is an opportunity for the service providers to actually step up a little bit, and use their SME experience. So they are the experts in the service that they're selling. So stepping in with the customer to help improve the quality requirements and dependencies, and working with the customer to go through detailed assumptions and all those sorts of things. So it's again, it's a two-way street. Service provider needs to work closely with the customer to iron out all these challenges.
Perfect. And I think, as you said earlier, poorly defined requirements do almost it kind of immediately result in a poorer performance because there's a lack of clarity about what people require.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So number 3 on our list is unitized pricing. So 20 years ago, when I started working in this field, you used to get a contract, and it might be for one service or multiple services, and there would just simply be a price for that contract, be that sort of 5 million a year, 5 million a month, whatever, but they basically be a price, and if you were lucky, some sort of payment schedule. And that was an immediate problem, because as soon as you went live with the contract, you're almost immediately into some sort of renegotiation because something had changed and there was nothing in the contract to tell you how you would deal with that change from a pricing point of view. So really, the more aggregated that your prices are, the less easy it is to manage that contract going forward. And really what you're looking for is an agreed mechanism or mechanisms for volume changes. So, and in doing that, the best way to go about that is to think about what the provider's cost drivers are, and how they relate to your metrics. So if I take service desk, for example, then the key cost driver in service desk for a supplier is labour. So how many people do I have to put on this in any one shift? The key metric for the customer is the number of service calls, because the number of service calls is something that the customer can clearly measure, and it's that number of service calls that actually drives the amount of labour that's required. So when you're setting up unitized pricing for service desk, it ought to be done on number of service calls, or sometimes there's a kind of a direct relationship between number of service calls and number of people in the organization. So it'd be along those lines. And the key thing is that if you're negotiating the unit pricing before you sign the contract, you are going to get a much better deal than if you try and negotiate changes to the pricing after you've signed the contract. And I guess for me, that's the key thing. You get a lot less friction and renegotiation going forward if you've negotiated prices that enable you to change volumes up and down prior to signing. Rob?
Absolutely, on the last point, Mark. Absolutely. I think this is all about the shift in, because as you said before, going away from aggregated pricing, one price for everything, into greater transparency. So customers are basically saying we need to understand about what we're paying for, why we're paying it, what are we getting for our money, all these sorts of things. So it's about transparency for me. But unitized pricing, I think, has a place. I think for complex technology procurement, there's lots of dependencies and integration points and software licensing and usage and all those sorts of things. I think it's a little bit more. I think it can be a little bit more complex. But where it can apply, it's a great way for the customer to understand what they're buying, what they're paying for. And it's a great filter for the customer, for me as well. So if it's a service desk or something that can be commoditized like that, they want to deal with the best. So it's a great way for organizations with those real specialists SME type skills to differentiate themselves in the market, in the customer's eyes. So for a service provider, it gives it, it will give them that opportunity to be transparent in their costs and what they deliver. That builds trust. That's just it's a massive thing for the service provider. And it's, as you say, it's an agreed way to manage the scale issue. Whether cloud, for instance, is one thing. The use of cloud as workloads go up and down and all the rest of it. Yeah. So they are great things for a service provider to be able to say, we understand this stuff. We provide great transparent pricing. It gives us a market leading position in the marketplace and all those sorts of things. So it's an interesting area. It's a really, really interesting area, but I think it needs more development as we go on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect. So moving on to the fourth aspects on our list, we've got SLAs, and the view I always take is that less is more when it comes to SLAs. And my advice to clients is always choose the 5 to 10 service levels that are most important to your business. And that the reason for that is that that's where the service providers are going to be focusing their efforts. And I mean, not all SLAs are the same. So, for example, availability is going to be far more important to an organization than a root cause analysis report deadline, for example. And I have seen contracts with hundreds of SLAs in. And the difficulty there is that the temptation for the service provider is to deliver the 90% of them that are cheap and easy to deliver, and not the 10% that are hard and difficult, which tend to be the ones that are actually the key ones required by the client. The other thing with having too many SLAs is actually just costs a lot of money, both almost always on the client side, because firstly you've got your own resources that you need to deploy in order to review all the reports that come in, go through all the service levels and talk to the vendors about them. On the vendor side, they need to do all those reports and then have the meetings about them, all of which you're going to be charged for. So it is kind of a lose-lose situation. Rob, what's your view?
It's an overhead, isn't it, Mark? In terms of it's a cost overhead, which the SLAs look, we need all these SLAs in place. We want to be, we want the service that we want from the supplier, but
it's the lack of focus. It's the lack of focus, I think, is the main thing.
No, absolutely spot on. So I used to sit in SLA meetings, even though sales guy, I like that sort of stuff. But I used to think of SLAs, discussion of the SLAs, as the same as we'd have around T's and C's when you're responding to your RFIs and RFPs and all this sort of stuff. So less is more, isn't it? So you basically filter out the things that really matter to you as a supplier, as a service provider, and try and think what really matters to the customer. So filter those ones out and have conversations around those clauses or those SLAs, and everything else is to be negotiated out. So it's about alignment for me. So the SLAs really need to align to what the customer outcomes are, right? That's possible, and where possible, and also the experience that they want. So that's what in my mind, that's what the SLA should do. That might open doors for areas of improvement in continuous improvement and other benefits the service provider can deliver. But it's all about delivering success. That's what the SLAs and the governance and everything else should be. It's all geared towards delivering the success of the contract.
Yeah, absolutely. So the final one, number 5 on our list, are service credits. So, and as I highlighted at the beginning of the call, this is about making sure they're an encouragement, not a punishment. So that they absolutely need to be large enough that they get attention. Because otherwise, if it's more profitable to pay the service credits than it is to fix the problem, in all likelihood, that's what's going to happen. And it's probably the breach for non-performance clause in the contract isn't going to be enough, because that is, if you have to enact that, it's extremely disruptive and expensive to simply change the service provider. So that's the first, my first sort of thing. Are they large enough? Are they actually going to make a difference? The next thing to think about is not all service levels are created equal. So again, availability is more important than a P3 fix, for example. So one of the things that you can use to make this happen in a contract is using a points-based system for service credits. So you allocate more points to the service levels that are the most important. If those service levels have failed, then a larger number of points is accrued in that month, and that then relates to the amount of service credit that's paid in the month, which will be how that mechanism works. The other thing that I suggest is including an earn back clause. So this is when a problem's fixed and it stays fixed for a reasonable period of time, then the service credits that have been paid essentially get paid back to the supplier. Now that makes a big difference, I've found, to behaviours in terms of what gets fixed and what doesn't. It also, having that clause in, gives you the ability to negotiate higher level of service credits, to fix in with my first point about making sure they're large enough. I think the final piece for me on service credits, and yeah, I appreciate probably most people know this, but it's worth saying, is just making sure you've got a clause in there where the failure to report a service level is treated the same as a failure of that service level. And so service credits are paid if it's not reported. Otherwise, it's too much of a temptation in a bad month simply to say, well, we can't report it this month. Rob?
Yeah, another good one. So it's like SLAs, isn't it? Service credits. I mean, these are regimes, and for the service management teams from service providers, seen frustrations and all sorts of stuff in terms of reading through SLA requirements, service credit regime requirements, all this sort of stuff. So on service credits, the service provider understands the need for service credits. Absolutely, yeah, it's a way to keep the service provider, hold them to account, I suppose, without getting lawyers involved. But what you said before was really resonated with me, is to get them to do better rather than to punish them all the time. That's what your service credit regime should really be about. Yeah, so it can't be just a big stick to bash the service provider with all the time. If they're too harsh, and again, you mentioned it before, if they're too harsh, it just drives a completely wrong set of behaviors. People get very defensive, and they get very negative, and all this sort of stuff. And that all again, all leads into what you started the conversation about in terms of performance and lack of flexibility. The SLAs and the service credit, all this stuff is just too difficult, and it's a burden, and you're not going to get the outputs that you want. For all the procurement people on the call, I think this is an area you should really look at very early on in your engagement with your suppliers for your contracts. So you clearly articulate what your SLA regime is really intending to do, what your service credit regime is really intending to do, and get input from the service providers themselves in terms of how they can help deliver those things, because these are key areas. This is where the relationships often fall down for me. So better engagement with your service providers, better understanding from everybody concerned, and you can and again, it's all about delivering success. That's what it's all about, yeah, and delivering that key customer experience for me. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So just in terms of a wrap now of what we've gone through before we get to the Q&As, we've talked about 5 key aspects of the service provider contracts that make a real difference to how those contracts operate on an ongoing basis. The first was detailed governance processes, so making sure there's clearly defined meetings and their hierarchy, making sure there's clear escalation process, much more detailed than you get in the general T's and C's, and making sure that there's commercial governance built into those governance processes as well. The second was making sure there's clear requirements, deliverables, assumptions and dependencies, so taking the to do that right, using upper and lower limits where things aren't 100% clear, and making sure that there's no open-ended dependencies. We talked about unitized pricing and making sure there's an agreed pricing mechanism to deal with volume changes. We talked about there being fewer SLAs, so choosing 5 to 10 SLAs that focus the service provider on what's most important for your business. And we talked about service credits, so making sure that they're high enough to affect the behaviours of the supplier. Thinking about a points-based system so that the supplier is focused on your most important service levels. Using an earn back clause to drive the right behaviours with the supplier, and making sure that a failure to report is dealt with in the same way as actually failing the service level itself. Rob.
So again, yeah, all these things are just interrelated for me all the way through. So you know, and again, it's all I've always looked at on the BD side, working for the service providers. It's all about delivering the experience the customer wants and delivering the outcomes that they're trying to achieve every single time. So you can, I said earlier on, you could talk quite a lot about these things individually, but it's understanding how they all connect together for me. And if you can, if you can get into that and make that successful, then your chance of success in terms of the relationship, delivering the service the customer wants, and for a service provider, winning more business and getting a great reputation in a very competitive marketplace is absolutely key. Absolutely key.
Perfect, thank you. So let's have a look at the Q&As. Let's see what questions we have, and we shall reach forward. So I've got a question here from Lee, which do you have mechanisms that help public sector customers enact their procurement processes more quickly in a timely manner?
Good question for you, Mark.
Well, yes, okay. I don't have a lot of experience of the public sector, but what I do have is quite a lot of experience of driving faster procurement processes. And one of the ways that we do that is we segment the procurement process into different work streams. And we find ways to do some of those work streams in parallel. So what tends to happen 9 times out of 10 is that people look at a procurement process and they'll run that procurement process in series, and that inevitably takes longer. If you can chop things up and do a number of different things in parallel, and it may require more people to do that, then you can in some cases reduce the length of the procurement process by half. But you can halve the procurement process. So that's that would probably be I think the best way to do that. I'm not sure. I think in public sector, as long as you do everything that you need to do, you're okay. and you meet the requirements, I think it it doesn't necessarily have to be done in series.
Yeah, I think I understand where Lee's coming from here. So I've worked in energy utility sector for many, many years, and they use public sector procurement processes to, for transparency and
Mm, mm,
being fair and all this. These are key.
mm,
These are things that are obligated to do,
mm,
right? So they have to tick those boxes. For me, it's probably it's about the relationship, right? It's about really about the relationship you can try and build with the customer. There's a set of rules you have to follow, but if you can create a relationship where you can have those open, robust conversations very early in a sales cycle or a service cycle or whatever it is, to really make sure that your own organization is mapping into what the customer's trying to achieve. The customer can see the value in terms of what you're bringing. Like you talked about requirements
mm,
before. Um, you know, the service providers they're the experts. That's what the customer's
mm,
looking for them to be. They're the experts. So help them with if their requirements are poorly
mm,
defined. Don't let them just blindly go forward into a contract and procure
mm,
a dodgy set of requirements. Engage early, show
mm.
some value up front and
Yeah.
show. And yeah, you might be giving a
Well,
few things away to
mm.
your competitors, but
Well,
it creates.
that's a good
Yeah,
example, Rob, because you know when you're in that process of determining the requirements and documenting them,
yeah,
one of the things I do is if there was more than one service that you were contracting for, I'd split those up in
yeah,
two different work streams,
yeah,
and I'd have the requirements definition, teams working from both the customers and the suppliers at the same time
yeah,
on the different services,
yeah,
whereas most people will do that in series, do
yeah,
one service, then another
yeah, yeah,
service.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Good point.
because there's only one team
Yeah, yeah,
where you can do that differently.
yeah.
Right, so we've got a question from Sam Penny. So when you are negotiating on requirements, assumptions, etc., what should you do if you are running out of time? Um, okay, well,
Run.
well, no, I get this quite a bit. You know, you've got a project team that's burning a sort of a couple of 100K a week waiting for you to sign the contract. Um, what I do there is, if I'm given that challenge, is essentially create a risk register of the unclear things in the contract. Um, so there may be sort of 100 things left to resolve. 10 of those things could be super critical with a massive risk. The others may have some degree of risk. But then, the people who are giving that pressure then have a view of, okay, if we move forward and you sign at this point, here's the risk that you'll carry forward going into the contract at a fairly granular level.
Yeah. This one for me is about everyone understanding what those risks are
Mm,
on both sides of the discussion. So, the customer understands the risks that are taken forward, but the supplier understands the risk from their side, and also, assumptions and all this. So it has to be very, very
yeah.
clearly articulated and documented in terms of what that all means. So
Mm,
and that's how you move forward. Yeah, it just has to be. I mean, I've been in the energy utility sector for years,
mm,
and as that sector
yeah.
has changed and so on and so on, so many organizations out there have moved forward when they really
Mm,
shouldn't have moved forward, or they didn't really understand the
mm,
problems they were going to have or the risks they were going to face if those
mm.
requirements weren't sort of bedded down. Yeah.
Okay. And we got about 3 or 4 minutes left and a couple of questions. So another one from Sam. What happens if a service provider won't agree to any significant service credits? Well, I th I think you alluded to this,
Yeah.
Rob, earlier. With the service credits, this needs to come very early in the process. So when you do the RFP, um, you need to be getting out clearly what is the level of service credits that we require you to quote for, and what does the regime look like? Because at that point you're in a competitive situation, um, and people know that the pricing they come forward with should reflect the service credits you require. Now, you know, if at the end of your RFP, nobody's been prepared to quote against the level of service credits that you want, then you know you're going to need to get some feedback about were they right to start with. You know, if you've gone for 100%, you might not get anybody quoting against them. But yeah, you don't want to leave that to negotiation. That really needs to be part of the bidding process.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier on, Mark, you
Mm.
engage early on these things, yeah.
Yeah,
So you understand that the people who are
Mm.
bidding for these contracts really understand what you're trying to do,
Right.
why try and do it, and you just don't get these problems down the line. And the point that
Mm.
Lee made before in terms of public sector procurement, there are processes and timelines that you have to follow, but you have to try and find a way to engage from both sides, so you can sort all these issues out. Yeah.
Final question, and we'll need to be quick, then wrap up. So, what's your experience on definition of acceptance criteria for the solution or service? We're recommending that our clients define these up front during the requirements definition phase, but many organisations only think about acceptance criteria after the transaction during implementation. Now, you're absolutely right, Mike. You definitely have to be clear about what the acceptance criteria look like. And in terms of the deliverables, I'd specify the acceptance criteria for that specific deliverable. So that should be done at a deliverable level basis.
Yeah, spot on. Absolutely spot on.
And that's my experience, by the way. It takes some time, but that's how you should do it. Acceleration of global capacity capability centres, similar to IT service providers. Let me read that again. With the acceleration of global capability centres, similar to IT service providers, any specific aspects of sourcing governance needs to be looked into. So sourcing governance, I think we might be out of time. Let me check. Do we need to wrap up? Okay. I think we need to wrap up. This is almost my concern. We could be here all day.
Yeah.
So a great question there from Ramesh, and another one from Lee saying they have to go. Thank you all for attending today. We really appreciate it, and thanks for all your questions. If you want to talk further to us about anything, please reach out, and we'll see you all on the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.